Welcome to Cybersecurity Sense, a weekly podcast providing updates and insight into the latest in cybersecurity. Brought to you by LBMC Information Security. Now, here's your host.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to LBMC Cybersecurity Sense. This is William Parks, your host, again with another episode with bill.dean. Bill, how's it going?
Man, I'm so glad you had me back to talk. I guess I didn't wear out my welcome the first time.
You didn't run me off. You didn't run the viewers off. But today we're going to be talking about ransomware and how we have that as it's a ransomware readiness assessment and how that's a service line for us. So, Bill, I guess we'll just hop right into it since you're the expert here. So where should we kind of start?
Well, I guess I've probably followed ransomware since around 2014. I think it was like CryptoWall or CryptoLocker came out. So like June of that year, those folks made like $30 million. So I am convinced that, all the credit card scraping, malware scraping programmers were reprovisioned into this new enterprise of ransomware. And man, it's just continued to grow from automated attacks to now it's much more sophisticated. And, I give a lot of talks on this. And one of them is, I'm ransomware CEO and how do I want this business to run? And, right now we're at version 2.5. And so it's pretty significant. It's had quite a bit of impact.
Right. And it's also interesting to see too. I saw a statistic a couple of years ago, but the ransomware like dark web market has actually surpassed the global drug market.
Really?
Yeah, they're doing quite a bit more in revenue than drugs are. So,
well, I have nothing to substantiate this, but I'm convinced that Bitcoin exists for ransomware. If you think about it, a long time ago, they had to go get money packs from CVS. And I'm sure the ransomware CEO said, we have to have a currency that we can use that can't be traced. Right about the same time Bitcoin came out. Coincidence? I don't know.
Oh, I completely agree with you on that, Bill. And I think, a lot of crypto was created for that kind of dark web underground purchase, but just to kind of keep things anonymous, or at least what they think is anonymous. No longer is it anonymous. But no, I would agree with you on that. And I think that's the basis of a lot of things, because without that underground market really utilizing it, I mean, you can't just necessarily go into a store and just buy like a pack of gummies with Bitcoin.
Yeah, it'd be a big old pack of gummies.
Yeah, that'd be a pretty fat pack of gummies right there. So I guess the first question I want to ask you about ransomware is, from the perspective of a client or an organization, are they really, like how at risk are we? And especially if they're like a super small organization, do they really need to worry about this?
Well, I'm not a motivational speaker since I work in InfoSec, but unfortunately, the ransomware gangs, they're not looking for notoriety as to who they plan to affect. They just want people that are going to pay.
Right.
And, few, attacks have we seen that just require so much from an organization to recover from. If you have a defaced website, yeah, it's painful, but ransomware takes down the entire operations of an organization. They really don't care the size.
Right.
If they think that you've got some money that you'll pay to bring the operations back up, then yeah. And in fact, I'm convinced that they oftentimes may focus. And again, this isn't the automated, we're going to throw out a big net and see who we can get. They're kind of targeting, but they would probably focus more. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to focus more on the companies that more than likely don't have the resources to recover from it quickly.
Right. And I think it's important to note too that, now there's a lot of legislation that's being passed to where organizations can't actually pay those ransoms. So some big organization now, if they were to pay a ransom, that would get a ton of news press. But now that those threat actors understand that that's a thing, they're going to target smaller businesses. I'm not saying this is exactly what's going to happen, but I will say that I feel like there are probably trends that will happen because those smaller businesses, if they're not being watched by so many eyes, may try and make a stab at paying that ransom to see if they can just get it off their back really fast.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach from our government, and I don't know how well it's paying off, but yeah, they're trying to deter that because, if you talk to federal law enforcement, they'll convince you that paying the ransom is, you're funding terrorism, and there's probably kittens dying somewhere if you pay a ransom. They just don't want you to pay the ransom.
Right.
But at the end of the day, they don't have a business to run. Some companies, if they don't pay the ransom, they go out of business.
Right. And so that's what they're having to upkeep there. So what does the average payout for a ransom typically kind of look like?
It varies. We've actually had clients that were hit with ransoms of, they were asking 10, $11 million, but
My
they spend
goodness.
they spend a lot of time on networks. It's not the attack from the old days. This is more like the APT style attack, and they spend a lot of time to kind of understand what they think you'll pay. They'll negotiate, and so I think on average, I saw a stat somewhere around $250,000 for the ransom payment. Now, the decryption key is, of course, that's what you're paying for. The decryption key is not pixie dust. I mean, it still takes a lot of work to get that applied. And so what this doesn't take into account is just the cost of the business outage. I mean, if you get consultants involved, and, if you can't conduct business for 3 weeks, that's kind of hard on the bottom line. And, earlier you were bringing up the OFAC list. That's what the government has tried to put into place to keep organizations from paying the ransom to countries that are on the terrorist list, which I find it a little bit funny because I have no idea where these attackers are if I pay a ransom. So I'm not sure how they track that down, but it's a valid effort.
Right.
People are still paying the ransoms.
Right. No, I totally agree. And I mean, I think even too, sometimes it can be really hard to sit here and attribute something to necessarily like a government per se, or not a government, but a nation. Because I mean, like you're saying, it's hard to track down those individuals. And there are definitely ways to do it, especially quantum computing and whatnot on the back end. That's very hush hush right now. But it's hard to really determine where they kind of originate from. So will being resilient against ransomware make me resilient against other kinds of cyber attacks? Like, does that kind of go hand in hand, would you say, or do they typically look for one specific thing and that's all they care about?
I think currently, yeah. And I mean, going back to something you said, we can't pinpoint who it is, but when our intellectual property is being stolen, we kind of know which nation state's probably responsible for that. And when money's being stolen, we kind of know the threat actor we're worried about there. So what's interesting there is that's how you kind of develop your approaches to defense. And so it's funny you bring up about the other attack types. What we see now for the really sophisticated ransomware 2.5, it's more like the APT. It's the compromise an account, get onto the network, maintain persistence, have a command and control, escalate privileges, deploy malware. That's a pretty sophisticated attack lifecycle.
Right.
And so reading the MITRE ATT&CK playbooks that we follow with our ransomware readiness assessment, if you kind of build that out a little bit, man, that's like 95, 96% of the sophisticated attacks we're really worried about. It's that persistence and moving laterally and getting into the environment and exfiltrating data, which the ransomware groups do now. They're like, well, if you don't want to pay a ransom, that's fine, but we've got all your sensitive data. If you don't pay a ransom, we're going to disclose it. So I'm convinced, I'm biased, but I'm convinced if you can withstand a really good ransomware attack, you can withstand the majority of sophisticated attacks we're worried about now.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, especially even as far as backups go, right? Like, let's say someone gets compromised, all their systems are shut down. If you have backups from days prior and you're actually able to pinpoint where that malware is on your network or on those backups, I mean, you can get back up and running relatively fast compared to if you were sitting there waiting to negotiate with them and, the whole long spiel of things.
Yeah, and we do a lot of tabletop exercises just specific to ransomware. And what most companies do, they work in parallel. They'll start the recovery operations while they're trying to figure out if they're going to pay the ransom or not.
Right.
And so, even companies now that are completely software as a service based, what's really interesting is through COVID, we sent everyone home. Well, now the destruction of ransomware can be even more devastating. If 80% of your workforce is at home working on laptops and you can encrypt those laptops, man, logistically, that's a nightmare. Even if everything's in the cloud, you still have to replace all those laptops. So it's an interesting dynamic now with the hybrid workforce as to the impact of ransomware, because before it was the data center. If we can shut down the servers, they can't work. Well, man, if you can shut down 1,000 laptops that are geographically dispersed across the United States, man, that's even more devastating. How are we going to pull that off?
That's pretty tough.
Yeah, these folks aren't just coders of malware. I mean, they know the business angle and the impact pretty well.
Right. I mean, you think about it too, and what's an interesting perspective as well for those of you that are out there that are learning about ransomware right now. In other countries, running a ransomware organization in the U.S., I can't speak for all the other countries, but there are countries out there. It's illegal here, but it is a totally legitimate publicly traded company in other nations. So
yeah, it's really interesting. I can cite it in Russia. the last time I looked, when I was giving some ransomware talks, it was against the law in Russia to hack. No, it's legal to hack from Russia unless you're attacking Russia. So some of the early variants of the ransomware, we would look at the actual binaries and it would have a geolocation code. And if it was any of the Russian countries, it would actually dissolve and wouldn't even execute.
Oh yeah, and that's what's crazy about it. But I mean, it is true. It is true. And so to combat these things, what services are offered, or even what services do we offer that kind of help the organizations to understand their risk of a ransomware attack, or even just cyber attack in general, I guess?
Yeah, most of the time when companies are coming to us, especially if they're new clients, they're always asking, am I secure? Really what they're asking, in my opinion, is could I withstand a ransomware attack? And so when you begin to ask them more questions, they're like, well, we want a pen test. We just want to know how well we'd withstand, a ransomware attack. I'm like, well, that's, a pen test really isn't going to tell you that.
Yeah, it's kind of different.
It's a little different. And so we started doing purple team exercises in which, all right, we're going to emulate the attacker with you watching us. And before we knew it, people were asking us just to do purple team exercises using modern attack playbooks to do ransomware attacks. And so we would walk through that playbook so they could get a feel whether or not they could withstand, a ransomware attack. And,
Right.
I kind of looked at that and I said, well, there's more to this. We could build something in which we don't just do the technical work, but we start out by, let's look at your incident response policy. Are you doing any tabletop exercises, to see how you would get through this? If not, we can help you with that. What do your backups look like? Are your backups on a USB drive connected to the server? It's not going to be good. Or are your backups immutable or offline? Or so it's a little bit of a risk assessment on either side of a really focused purple team based on the MITRE ATT&CK and the MITRE DEFEND frameworks. Right.
And so I guess that's just a small sliver of what's included in the assessment, correct?
It's probably the core, because that's what most people are asking is, technically, could we survive a ransomware attack? Well, I look at it and say, well, there's more to it than just the technical portion. Are you going to see if somebody's doing password spraying to get those credentials? Do you know how to respond to it if it does occur? And so we're kind of walking them through the entire life cycle, from the beginning all the way to the recovery of what that would look like, not just the malware itself.
Right. And this being said too, having that insight into your network and seeing what's going on, as a pen tester on the team here, when we work with clients and we're with organizations and they're actually able to send us messages of very exact things that we're doing on their network because they have everything fine-tuned and they can see everything we're doing, it makes us happy. Obviously, it's frustrating for a pen tester because we want to try and be as quiet as possible, right? But as far as helping the client, it's a great thing to see.
Yeah, and that's contrary to what I think a lot of people think about pen testers. I think, there's the perception that the pen testers just wanting to attack and break things and show how their defenses don't work. But just as you confirmed, we smile when the client says, was that you? And you're like, yeah, that was us. That was like my best stuff. And you caught it. You're like, great.
It's impressive.
I added value to that client, because it's really not fun to just go in and, just shred an environment and, give them this long report. We want to see that, man, you can really withstand this. And so going through these ransomware readiness assessments, I feel better about some organizations than what I may have felt prior to doing that.
Right.
And so walking through and I'm like, well, you don't have all the controls in place, but you did the tabletop, so I know how you would respond. And you can give them the confidence that, man, we're really in trouble. We need to work on these things. Or it could be, you're pretty tight. You need to maybe, shore up this little control here and maybe this alert and, look at the way you're doing your backups. But, I think you stand a pretty good chance against one of these. And so that's the ultimate goal, is to be able to smile and, confirm with the client, the confidence that they should have. And they're not just helpless. We can help them build that confidence. Just knowing what your deficiencies are that you can work on builds confidence.
Right. I agree. I mean, is there anything else you want to add to it, Bill, or is that pretty much it? I mean, it's a pretty quick summary of what the ransomware readiness assessment is. But I mean, just knowing that you can have peace of mind after you undergo this kind of this service and this assessment, it can really add a lot of value to you and your organization, especially your quality of sleep.
Yeah, most definitely, because when we get involved with a client that's not a client, I mean, they came to us during a ransomware situation, man, it's rough because we have to start from scratch. And, just for our clients that have been through this, if they get hit, we know exactly how they got hit.
Exactly.
We know exactly what to tell them. And so it just helps us serve our clients so much better.
Yeah, Bill. All right. Well, I guess that's about it for the podcast here. pretty short one today, about 15 minutes. So 15 minutes of nothing but goodness for you guys to enjoy on your end. Bill, thank you again for coming and joining us a second time. I know we'll see you in the future, I'm sure.
Yes, sir. Talk soon. Thank you, Will.
Alrighty. Thank you guys for listening to WMC Cybersecurity Sense. We'll see you guys on the next episode.